I'm McKinney Smith. After going through a divorce, my sister passing away, experiencing narcissistic abuse, and some significant health scares, I realized through sharing my story that I wasn't alone in my suffering. Suffering, subjective distress generated by the experience of being out of balance. In a deep dive to holistically heal mind, body, and soul is where I discovered peace, clarity, and connection. It is impossible to be truly wise without some real-life hardship, and we cannot develop post-traumatic wisdom without making it through, and most importantly, through it together. Social connection builds resilience, and resilience helps create post-traumatic wisdom, and that wisdom leads to hope. Hope for you and others witnessing and participating in your healing, and hope for your community. A healthy community is a healing community, and a healing community is full of hope because it has seen its own people weather, survive, and thrive. Doug Bopst is an award-winning personal trainer, 3-time author, speaker, and podcast host who transformed his life after facing challenges as a former felon and drug addict. He focuses on health and wellness and hosts the Adversity Advantage podcast. Doug has been featured in national media and recognized for his work. He shares inspiring stories of overcoming adversity and has spoken on various events and platforms, and has worked with organizations like McCormick and the Clemson football team. He's been featured on The Today Show, Men's Health, the Tom Bilyeu's Impact Theory podcast, Forbes, Gold Coast, and much more. So please welcome to the show, Doug Bopst.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share your story with us. I am someone who is genuinely interested in people's backstories, how they've overcome adversity. And I think there's so much that we can learn from each other. So I'm always grateful when someone is open and willing to come on and be transparent and share their journey. So thank you.
You got it. I'm excited.
So I want to jump, I guess, right in. And I typically like to start with where things began before we get to where you are presently, because I feel like our childhood wounds, our upbringing, our environment, all those things have a huge impact on who we are today. So as an icebreaker question, I would love to ask, who or what did you want to be as a child?
Icebreaker question. That's a good one. I think as a child, there was a variety of things I wanted to be. I would say the thing that most stuck out to me is I wanted to be involved in sports somehow. And that evolved as I got older. Like when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a professional athlete. I think just like many young boys, right? And then once I realized that my athletic ability didn't match up to my aspirations, I wanted to be some type of sports broadcaster. I was obsessed with sports growing up. I was the guy that would convince my parents to stay up late so I could watch SportsCenter. I was always getting up early so I could watch the morning edition of SportsCenter. I collected baseball cards, football cards, basketball cards. I played all the video games growing up. I just had this immense passion for sports.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. So what is your earliest childhood memory that defines who you are today?
Oof. I guess the earliest memory I have, which is also probably, it was a defining moment indirectly, was I remember my dad walking out on my mom when I was like roughly 5 years old. And then my parents got divorced from there, and it was a pretty contentious divorce, pretty rough divorce. And that really impacted my childhood and my brother's childhood as well. And I think that began to develop this "what's wrong with me" mentality when I was a kid. And why is this happening to me, and why am I different? Because where I grew up and maybe just the circles I ran in, it wasn't common for parents to be split up. Like I think divorce, I don't know what the rates were back then, but I guess from a objective or my perspective, it was much less than it is now. And so I would see my friends whose parents were together, and I'd be like, why are their parents together and mine aren't? Why am I being shuffled around from house to house? Why am I having to stay with my grandparents after school? Like, why aren't my parents here? And so it began to raise all these questions in my mind of, like, is there something wrong with me? Is there something different? And then the way they handled the divorce also shaped like how I viewed relationships, and even carried on into my adult relationships, which I had to actually work on a lot. But then outside of that, other things compounded from there, whether it was just the getting used to growing up in a stressful environment, whether it was just having a non-traditional family dynamic. And then I mentioned my passion and love for sports. And I was always like one of the last kids picked. I never made the special teams, like the travel teams or the club teams or whatever. I was always kind of made fun of for my athletic ability, even though like I had this deep rooted desire and passion for sports. Like if passion equals success, like I would have been one of the most successful athletes as a kid. And so that began to reinforce this what's wrong with me mentality, because I was like, like all these kids around me, we're all the same, right? We all are trying to do the same thing. We're all spending the same amount of time practicing, etc. Like, why are they being picked for the teams and I'm not? Like, why, even though I'm doing everything I can to work hard, like, why isn't that equaling success? So that started to kind of compound. I thought that I was broken, and that everything that I was going to do from there on out, I was going to fail. And then on top of that, in school, I was bullied a lot. I was picked on as a kid for a couple reasons. One, I started to develop some like body fat when I was young. I think I was like 10, 11, 12 years old. I started to get some belly fat, and I started to have to wear like husky clothes. And again, it was like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I eating the same foods as other kids? Why am I living the same kind of lifestyle as my friends? And I'm the one who's gaining some body fat. And I was told that I looked like I had Down syndrome as a kid. Like people would call me like some horrific names. And it developed this identity of what's wrong with me? Why am I so different? What did I do wrong? What did I do to deserve this? Because it's like, as a kid, you're just trying to get by. You're just trying to be liked by the kids in school. You're trying to get attention, I was trying to get attention from girls, which I think was obviously a very normal thing when you're in school, when you're in middle and high school. You're trying to be good at something so you can get admiration from your parents and get admiration from the people around you. And I wasn't really getting that in the ways that I wanted, in the ways that I desired. And I would come home at times from school and I would just cry in my room because I just was so upset with myself and my life. And I was afraid at times to go to school the next day, because I was like, well, what's tomorrow going to bring? If today was this bad, what's it going to look like then? And then that really set the tone for how a majority of the rest of my teenage years would play out. As I got involved with drugs and selling drugs and running around with the wrong crowd and getting myself in a lot of legal trouble, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I mean, yeah, that earliest childhood moment. As a matter of fact, I think it's the only moment I remember my parents together is that day, is my dad like walking out of my mom, moving out. And then like shortly after that, we're in two separate townhomes. And that's, it's sad, right? That's like the only memory I have. But from what I understand, it's pretty common that when something traumatic like that happens, that's kind of the only thing we focus on.
Absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely. I reference this book often, but I feel like I do it because it helped shift some things in my mind. But it's called What Happened to You? So it was written by it was co-written by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry. And so when you were talking about, what happened to you or what's wrong with you, it's like society has a tendency to automatically say, when they see someone acting or behaving or getting certain results, what is wrong with you, instead of asking what happened to you. And I can relate to, your childhood, where it's like, I was probably about 1 when my parents split, when my dad left to start his new family. And it's interesting how we have these vivid memories of our childhood and how they affect us as we become adults, how we view life, how we view relationships. you mentioned you as a teenager, so I would love to know what you were like as a teenager. Because I know, especially for the people who are listening, sometimes they feel like where they are, their situation or their scenario is it. They don't realize that you can evolve from that, or that you can attain higher things than that. So seeing where you are now, I would love to know, like, what were you like as a teenager?
I mean, I was very unconfident, had a lot of anxiety. I was depressed. I was stressed all the time. I was afraid of my own shadow, a lot of fear, walked very hunched over, not good posture. Like I said, very unathletic, even though I loved sports. But I was like a nice kid. Like I was a kind kid. Like I didn't want any trouble. I was trying to do whatever I could to fit in and trying to get people to like me. And, that resulted in obviously developing a low level of self-worth, because now, you're losing yourself in order to get the validation from other people. And then you're getting attention from people just for the sake of getting attention, even though those people may not be in the best interest of you. And so that's what I was like as a kid. I was a kid that was just completely scared, anxious, not confident, not well spoken. It's like people see me now and they see me in what I do today, and that I'm charismatic, that I'm outgoing, that I'm confident, and all that. I was never like that as a kid. I mean, all that came from me going through like hard times and a lot of adversity. That's what truly developed a lot of these skills that I have now, that people may look at and say, "Oh, like you must have always been this way." But people who knew me, like people who went to high school with me, they'll know like I was not like this. I was total opposite. Yeah, I mean, I was just a guy, like I said, just completely mentally burdened with negative emotions and a negative self-image and self-worth of myself that inevitably forced me down this horrific path of drug addiction.
Hmm. So before we get to the addiction piece, I would love to learn, like, what did you learn about emotions growing up, and how has it helped you or hurt you?
Um, I mean, I think emotions growing up, I think as a guy especially, you you're told you can't cry, right? So I think that has an impact on you when you're a kid, even though like by myself I cried a lot.
Mm.
I think that when you're scared of something, or when I was scared as a kid, I would think of that as a bad thing, even though that was probably a sign for me to change paths or change directions. Same with anxiety, depression. I saw it as all these negative emotions. Where now, I mean, can those emotions and states of mind be negative? I mean, of course. I view them now as just signals, and being like, okay, like if you're scared, what do you like something's off. Something is telling you something. Your body is trying to tell you something. Your body could be trying to tell you, oh, like this is new for you. Maybe you need to step into this, because you will become stronger, wiser. You'll develop into a better person after doing this. Your body may be telling you, like, don't do this because it's going to mess your life up, or you're going to get into a bad relationship, or you're going to set yourself back, whatever the example is. And you can say the same thing with when you're feeling depressed or anxious. Like I know at times in my life when I felt depressed, it was always because something was off or something had happened in my life that I needed to pay attention to. And the same thing with when I'm feeling anxious. Like people will ask me like, well, what is it? Like, why do you get anxious? And I'm like, well, I know that I tend to like overthink things and worry about certain things, especially when I have a lot on my plate. If I don't sleep well, my anxiety goes up. If I'm doing things that are not in alignment. I mean, I'm not talking from a legal perspective. I'm talking just from a soul perspective. I tend to get more anxious because I'm just not disconnected to myself. So I totally view them differently. And I think it's because, as a kid, like most kids don't have self-awareness like that, right? They're not like, oh, I'm feeling this way because of that. Again, like I said earlier, kids are just trying to get by, survive, have fun in school, get through it, go off to college if that's their goal, go off and play sports if that's their goal, go off to a trade school, whatever their goal is. But when you're an adult, it's your responsibility to develop awareness around those emotions, because a lot more is at stake now. Like as a kid, you're kind of under the responsibility and care. I mean, if you're lucky, obviously, of your parents. And when you're an adult, it's up to you. Like, you're legally responsible for all your actions. So if you're not aware of what you do when you get angry, like, that's going to be a problem. If you're not aware of how your anxiety impacts your day-to-day life, that's going to be a problem. If you don't manage stress well as an adult, that's going to be a problem. And so my ability, I think, to develop not just the self-awareness around all that, but the depth and how deep these emotions go, I think has really served me well, because I can pinpoint why I feel these emotions, and I can kind of trace it back to like situations in my life that maybe were primers for these emotions. I've also been able to take that and kind of just store it in my back pocket a bit, and not letting that be the driver of my day-to-day life, because I think it's easy to get caught up in this cycle of just going back into your past for everything. And I think it serves a purpose. I also think it can be detrimental, because now you're not even being present, and you're not even aware of like what your actions are you're not even being aware of what your actions are actually like doing to your life. And so you're continuing to like just blame like your past circumstances for the way you're behaving today. So that was a roundabout way of saying, like, yeah, I think as a kid, I mean, I wasn't as aware of my emotions, specifically how they impacted me. It was more just a feeling in the moment. And I just recognized a lot of what I was going through was bad. And now I'm coming out on the other side of it. I've realized that I've realized that there was purpose in those emotions, and that there's just signals for bigger problems that may be presenting themselves.
Yes. I love how you explain your emotions, how you process them, and even the importance of awareness. I'm an avid reader, so I always reference books, but there's a book called Permission to Feel. And he's explaining that, like you said, like, our feelings are not bad or good or negative or positive. Our feelings are data. They're letting us know what is going on. So it's important for us to have that awareness. And I think sometimes ignorance will allow people to look at someone else's emotions and disregard them and not ask questions or not be aware. And it's very easy for us to not be aware of our own emotions. So I love how you broke it down.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so you mentioned addiction and things like that. So you're known for going from felon to fitness.
Yeah.
So I would love if you so I understand how people, when they have experienced trauma and adversity, we look for things to numb, whether it be drugs, sex, like whatever. We look for things to numb the pain that we're feeling and what we're experiencing. So I can understand how the addiction came about based on what you've shared about your childhood. So I won't really ask you how you got into the addiction piece. But if you can share, like, how did fitness save you from addiction?
Well, fitness saved me because I was incarcerated on felony drug charges back in 2008. And during my incarceration, my cellmate got me into working out. And to, I guess, paint a better picture of who I was like when I was in jail, because a lot of things had happened since then. I mean, between the time I was legally allowed to work, I forget when I was legally allowed to work. It was sometime as a teenager. I forget, it was like 14, 15, 16, I forget. But nonetheless, between that time and the time I went to jail, I had 21 jobs by the time I was 21 years old. 21. And it wasn't because I just found something better. It was because I was selling drugs, and I felt that I could make way more money selling drugs than I could making, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour, whatever it was I was making. So I'd leave jobs because of that. I would get fired because I wouldn't show up, because all I cared about was getting high and selling drugs. Again, I would quit. If somebody pissed me off, I would quit because I knew I had this other job that made me way more money. I mean, the fact of the matter is, after I started selling drugs, after I graduated high school, like selling a lot of drugs, I should say, me having a job was just really was a front to either if I needed to get like an apartment, or if my parents or people in my family like were wondering what I was doing to make money. I wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm just selling drugs, even though they kind of knew it, but I couldn't openly admit that to them with them being okay with it. Right. And so 21 jobs by the time I'm 21, crippling when I say crippling, I mean crippling anxiety, like to the point where when later on in my teenage years, ended up going to the emergency room twice because I thought I was having a heart attack when really it was an intense panic attack. Yeah. Crippling anxiety, heavily addicted to Oxycontin, to drugs. I was selling a bunch of drugs before I went to jail. Damaged relationships, tons of legal trouble. As I just mentioned, I was a convicted felon at the time as well. And just in my mind, like a terrible human being. And so my cellmate, who looked like a more jacked version of Brad Pitt from the movie Fight Club, is how I like to describe him, just to paint a picture. He was like, "You're going to start working out with me when you get through your painkiller detox." And I was just like, "Dude, there's no way. Like, if you see me, like, I could have been a model for Pillsbury. Like, I was so fat. Like, I mean, when I say, I mean, just fat, like my body fat percentage, if I had to guess, was like 40% back then. And I didn't weigh that much. I mean, I maybe weighed, I don't know, like around 200 pounds, something like that. So it wasn't like anything insane, as far as my weight goes. And not too long after that, after I pretty much completely declined his offer, he's like asking me some questions. He's like, why did you go to jail? Like, what are you doing here? Why'd you get addicted to drugs? Why'd you start selling drugs? Like, asking me all the questions. And I started to blame everybody else for my problems but myself. I started to blame the girls for not being interested in me. I started blaming like the sports because I wasn't good at sports. I started blaming my parents, started blaming my friends and kids who bullied me. And he looked at me, and the PG version of it is he said, "Quit being a victim." And I remember looking at him, and I hated what he had to say, because I was looking for him to coddle me and say, "It's okay, Doug, the world's against you," because I convinced myself in my mind that was true. I had rationalized all of my poor behavior based on the fact that I did have some adversity growing up. And I was like, oh, well, because my parents got divorced, I can do this. Because I was bullied as a kid, I can do that. Because I'm being picked on, this justifies this. And it all makes sense, because in my mind, it did make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But my cellmate pointed out very clearly, he's like, "You're blaming everybody else for your problems but yourself, and taking zero responsibility for this." And he's like, "There's plenty of people that go through life with the same circumstances as you that aren't in jail, right, Doug?" And I'm like, "Yep." He's like, "So you have two choices: be a man and take responsibility for yourself, or go be a victim and cry in the corner and say, 'Woe is me,' and blame people for your problems." He's like, "Most people will do that." And it was like, in that moment, I had realized, like, the drugs had been started to get out of my system for a bit. This guy had no like real skin in the game as far as my life. He wasn't a member of my family. He wasn't like a lawyer. He was just like a guy I met in jail. So I was like, oh, this guy must truly care about me, like, unconditionally. And that inspired me to start working out. And when I got down to do a push-up, I couldn't do a push-up. As a matter of fact, I couldn't even do a push-up from my knees. That's how weak I was. And I remember looking at Eric, my cellmate, and I'm like, "Man, why can't I do a push-up?" And he looked at me. He was like, "'Cause you're fat." And I hated that word, because I was called that a lot as a kid. And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Doug, like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it." He's like, "You have excess body fat. Your upper body's weak. Your core is weak. You're out of shape." He's like, "So you're collapsing every time you try to go down to do a push-up. Your body can't physically push itself back up." And then I took a break, and I would walk up and down the steps in the common area of the jail. And I was out of breath, like, going up and down, because I was also smoking cigarettes too before I went to jail. And with his motivation and encouragement, training me in there every single day during my 90-day sentence, I was able to do a set of 10 push-ups and run a mile by the time my jail sentence was over. And the way that worked was, we started with being able to hold my body weight up from my knees. And then once I was able to do that, then it was like 1 push-up, then 2 push-ups from my knees, and then all the way up until I was able to do a set of 10. Same thing happened from my feet, holding my body weight up, 1 push-up, 2 push-ups. And the thought of me being able, like, at the beginning of jail, the thought of me being able to do a set of 10 push-ups from my feet
Mm-hmm.
was similar to if you had said, "Hey, Doug, like, tomorrow I want you to go climb Mount Everest." It would be the same. I'd be like, there's no way that's going to happen. It's physically impossible. And then the running was interesting too, because there's no track, there's no treadmills in jail, at least the jail I was at. And so the way to like measure the distance and how far I was going, we used a deck of cards, and there was like a perimeter in the common area in the jail where people would sit, they'd eat, they'd watch TV, they'd play games and stuff, play board games. And so I would walk around the perimeter, and every time I would take a lap, I would take a card from my left hand and pass it to my right hand. And then every time I would take another lap, do the same thing. And then I would use that to track like how far I went. And then I would progress to jogging, progress to running. And then again, sure enough, at the end, I was able to do the mile and then the 10 push-ups. And I always tell people it's not the direct impacts necessarily of fitness that can help you improve your mental health, recover from addiction, and have it do the same things it did for me. It's more like the indirect, I was able to finally get comfortable being uncomfortable. I was finally able to develop some self-discipline, finally able to prove to myself that I mattered enough to show up for myself every single day. And even on the days where I didn't feel like it, like most of the time in there, I didn't want to work out. Like I hated it. It was like so foreign to me to want to exercise. It also just developed this immense amount of confidence because I was able to prove to myself that I could do certain things that I never thought I could do. And that's life changing. Like I always tell people, like they look at me where I'm at now, or they'll look at other people who have had, success in their life. And I always say, like, the biggest level of confidence comes from going like from 0 to 3, not from 0 to 100. Like that time in your life where we've all, I think, been there in some capacity, where you're in the thick of the mud, you can't really see anything. You're like, I'm scared. I have no idea like what's going to happen moving forward, but I know I got to crawl right now and just move and keep going. And then once you get out of that mud and you're able to make some progress, the confidence you build from that process is what really carries you for the rest of your life, I believe. It's not the getting to the top. Like I think about what I'm most proud. People will ask me all the time, like, what are you most proud of? And, I could say it's the books. I could say it's different media stuff I've done. I could say it's the podcast, which I think all those things have been amazing. But that jail experience by far still stands out to me is the most instrumental, memorable experience of my life because of what I just shared and where I was. And I think if you can develop this whatever it takes mentality and learn to bet on yourself, even when the odds are against you, I think you'll win. I really do. And not necessarily in a financial way or in a personal achievement way, but you'll just tell yourself that you believe in yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, after that, my cellmate gave me a workout plan that I still have framed here so I don't forget where I came from. Lost a bunch of weight and then got to a place fitness wise where I wanted to help other people use fitness to transform their lives, became a personal trainer, built a very successful career in the fitness space. And that inspired me to do a lot of the other things I'm doing now, whether it's the podcast, writing, speaking, coaching, and stuff like that.
Like, wow. There's so much that you said there that I wanted to highlight and make sure that the listeners really took note, because one, with the cellmate, like I strongly believe that every single connection that we make, every single person that we meet can either be a blessing or a lesson. And you can know that person for 5 minutes, 5 years, 50 years. There's something that they can either teach you or bless you with. So it's beautiful that, someone else may have said, well, if you hadn't have gone to jail, would you be where you are presently? Or if you hadn't met that cellmate, all those things. So it's beautiful that, it's like, well, I strongly believe like, nothing happens by chance.
Sure.
So that connection, that cellmate, all of that was meant to be in order to transform where you are presently. I also understand, like, when it comes to habits, like naturally as people, we're habitual. Like we do things in habits. And then when we have an addictive personality, it's just intense. And whenever we're trying to shift a habit or something, if we don't replace it with something, then we'll automatically just pick up something else or go back to that other thing. So I think it's great that you were able to swap the drugs for fitness, the felony to fitness. And also you talked about with the fitness, like it's not just a physical thing. And, I'm a mindset coach. So we talk about this all the time, especially people who are going to the gym or trying to lose weight. Like fitness is a mental game. You're mentally pushing through all of these barriers. You're mentally pushing through all of these things in order to transform physically. It's about making the commitment to yourself. It's about doing the uncomfortable. It's about pushing through the terror barrier, all of those things. And then you talked about your present confidence, which I strongly believe that competence builds confidence. So,
Right.
you talked about just going from 1 to 3 and not 1 to 10. I think people often assume that, you got to do the big jump in order to get there. But I know for myself and anyone else that I've spoken to that have done big things, it's about the small things, and continuously doing the small things helps to build that confidence that we have now. And then I love how you talked about being able to now transform and utilize what you've learned and what you've experienced to do all of these trainings and do all these things, because a common theme that I have seen in doing, I don't know, I think we've recorded probably 280 episodes or something by now, but
Wow.
in every single episode, the common theme is that our pain births our purpose. So I love how you've been able to transform all that you've experienced into helping others, into you've transmuted that pain into something greater, something bigger, something that will leave a legacy, something that has a domino effect. Like, you help one person and you don't even know how many people that can help. So you're now utilizing your platform and your knowledge and your experience to make a greater impact. And I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when you don't have the confidence, it's hard to create confidence because you create cognitive dissonance where, you can tell yourself all day that you're the greatest. You can tell yourself all day that you're this and that. But if your actions don't reflect that, I just think your brain is going to somehow be convinced that it's not true. It's like the fastest way to build trust with yourself is to do the things that you say you're going to do. Because if you tell yourself, I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow, and you don't do it, your brain's going to be like, well, you told me you're going to do this and you did. And like, how am I supposed to believe you? And then that carries on into other areas of your life as well. And I think that that's just something that we need to, that people, I think it's something that people need to grasp, because there's a lot of noise out there on social media, and it's easy to look at the highlight reels of other people and say, I want to, accelerate my success and get to that place because it looks cool on social media. It looks like my friend or my family or whoever it is that they're paying attention to. And it, I think, limits people's ability to take action because they're like, well, that's going to take so long to get there. I have no idea how to do it. I want the easy way. But they don't realize that every person who's had success like that or has accomplished something meaningful has really had to start from ground zero. I'll give you an example. Like, people will look at me now and they'll be like, oh, it's so awesome that you're on these big podcasts or you're getting these big guests or whatever it is. But I'll look back and I'll be like, I've been sharing my story for like over 10 years, over a decade. And it really just started to get picked up, I guess, by bigger media, maybe over the last 5-6 years or so. And so people don't see like beneath the iceberg. They don't see that it started with me just sharing my story with my clients, and started me sharing my story with like local newspapers and local media and doing a lot of like stuff here in my hometown. And then that helped me put the reps in, and it helped me get practice and develop the confidence to be able to share my story. And that led to a lot of the other, things that I'm doing now. But I just encourage people to remember that you have to stack small wins. Like, small wins lead to big goals. And the only way to get to the place of that 0 to 100 or to the place where you think people are on social media is by starting where you're at. And so it's putting the shoes on and going out for a walk. It's, making that first therapy appointment. It's raising your hand and asking for help. It's, telling yourself you're not going to drink tomorrow. It's whatever, right? It's that small step that you can build off of that. It's that small step, then you build off of that. And that all compounds. Like, for me, the day I left jail, like I wasn't like, oh, I want to be a podcast host or I want to be a personal trainer. It was literally about survival. Like I remember exactly how I was feeling the day I left jail. I was freaking scared. I was mortified. I was terrified because up until that point, I had proven to myself that I was a failure based on the way I lived my life. Like I told you my track record. And so most of me doubted me. Most of me knew that I was going to fail, but there was that small part of me that there was that small part of me that believed I was going to succeed. And it was because of the mindset that I had started to develop when I was in jail, where I was like, all right, I've seen the things that I do daily that make me a better person. I know who I want to become. Like I honestly, to be fully transparent, like I just wanted to be ripped so I could get attention from girls when I was like getting out of, like that was like a main goal, which I think vanity is, I think vanity sometimes gets lost in the weeds with health, but I mean, that is in a way, like a lot of people's goals, especially early on when they're trying to transform their health. I mean, it can't be the only thing, but I knew that if I wanted to be somebody who was lean, jacked, confident, thought highly of myself, that there were certain things I needed to do on a daily basis in order to get myself there. I knew I needed to work out, eat a certain way, stay away from certain people, talk to myself in a certain way, get good sleep, stay away from drugs, obviously, and selling drugs and all those things. And I knew if I did that every day, I had control over those things, that it would give me a chance to become that person I wanted to be. But if I told myself, well, I'm never going to be that person because of X, Y, and Z circumstances or X, Y, and Z excuses, I would have automatically counted myself out of that transformation just based on stuff in the past. And so what ended up happening was I would go like a few days after jail staying on the path and not doing and staying away from all those things that I mentioned and doing the things I was supposed to do. And I'm like, wow, I haven't used drugs for 3 days outside of jail. This is amazing. Or I've stayed on this fitness path for 3 days on my own without my cellmate. This is amazing. And then that compounds more confidence. Then a week goes by and you're like, oh, it's been a week. Then like 3 weeks go by and it's been 3 weeks. And then a month. You're like, holy crap. Like I can run a 5K now. I can do 50 push-ups. I haven't touched drugs in 3 months. I blah, 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 right? Whatever it is. And it all came from like just that simple win of focusing on that one day. And you just never know. You never know how much your life can change in a matter of months or years. You just don't. But I think a lot of times people, they count themselves out because of what's happened in the past. And trust me, I get it. Like I understand how tough it can be to like carry that weight with you. And then on the flip side of that, they count themselves out because they're like, well, I'm never going to achieve this thing because of how long it'll take, how old I am, my skill set right now, my level of fitness, whatever it is. But I'm not going to say if I can do it, you can do it, because I mean, that's a big thing to say. But I'll say if somebody like myself can achieve some of the things that I did coming from where I came from, there's a good shot that you can too.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
And I think that, people, because I mean, I think the victim mindset and feeling sorry for yourself, like it really gets you nowhere. And I know that a lot of times in life, people have horrible circumstances. Like I mean, some of the stories I've heard on my show or just talking to people that I know, I'm like, wow, like, man, I had it good compared to you. Right. And there's people that had a lot better than me. Right. So, but the thing is, like, you can't change the past. You can only learn from it and grow from it. And if the thing that you want, like a lot of times when people are feeling sorry for themselves and they're trapped in the thick of the victim mindset, what they really want is they want some sort of guarantee that everything's going to be okay. And they want some level of happiness and satisfaction and fulfillment. They want meaning. They want purpose. They want validation. And the only way to get there is by changing your actions and moving forward. Like you focusing on the past and blaming your parents, your family, the people around you for everything that's happened to you, like it's going to guarantee that you don't get there. So I always tell people, like, make the other choice. It's the only choice that you have.
That accountability piece is big.
Yeah.
I've learned that it's hard for people to take accountability, especially if it's something that can create shame or guilt or any of those things. It's almost like they view it as death. Like they Like it's that detrimental to them. So being able to hold ourselves accountable, it's not easy, but completely necessary in order to move forward and to be able to help other people do the same. But I wanted to highlight something you said about the small wins.
Yeah.
I think that is an excellent, excellent point to share because, like you said, people will look on social media and see the accolades and the successes and your highlight reel and feel like I can never attain that. You know, they
Right.
look at where you are, but they don't look at the story of how you actually got there. It's very you know, I can relate where it's like, you know, I grew up in government housing to a single mom, had all of these things in my childhood, but in certain rooms now, because I was mentored by Bob Proctor, because I've had certain people on the podcast where people have these assumptions about
Right.
my life, not realizing all the small wins that I've had to celebrate in order to get to where I am presently. And part of what I love about podcasting versus Instagram is you get to dig deeper into that person's story. You get to understand the mindset. You get to understand the past traumas, the adversities they've had to overcome instead of just focusing on, you know, the tangibles from their present success or all those things. I think it's important for people to realize that it is attainable if you are committed to that change for yourself. Oftentimes people will say they want a certain change, but they're interested in that change. And I feel like if you're just interested, you can still make all the excuses under the sun in order not to do that thing. But if you're committed to that change, you do whatever it takes and you push yourself into those uncomfortable places and push through those terror barriers in order to, I guess, receive those rewards on the other side of what you want your life to look like.
Yeah, there is a big difference, obviously, between being interested and committed, right? Because when you're interested, it's like you do it when it's easy. When you're interested, you do it when it's convenient. When you're interested, like you do it like on your terms, right? But when you're committed, you're like all in no matter what.
Yeah.
And I think along that same along those same lines, I always tell people like in life, sometimes you got to play hurt. Like you think about like Michael Jordan, Game 7, NBA Finals. He like twists his ankle up a little bit. There's 2 minutes left. The game's tied. Do you think he's going out of the game? Like no way. Like he's staying in the game for the final 2 minutes to make sure he gets the ball and to see if he hits the game winning shot, right? And I think it's the same thing in life. Like, sure, there's going to be times where, like, if Michael Jordan tears his ACL, like, he's probably not going to go back in. But I'm saying most of the time, our little pain that we're experiencing, our little hurts in life, are things that we can still manage and walk through.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the emotional pain, maybe you didn't sleep as well the night before, maybe you got more stress, maybe you got into a fight with your boss. Like, a lot of times, what happens when those things occur is you're like, oh, my day is so bad. I'm just going to sit this one out and then we'll do better tomorrow. And I think what happens when you do that is you tell yourself that when life gets hard, it's okay to just quit. It's okay to quit on your goals. It's okay to take the day off. And it's not to say, again, that there's not going to be days where you're forced to do that. But a majority of the time, I think you got to be able to play hurt. You got to be able to say, okay, like I'm only feeling like 70% today. I want to go into the gym and give it my 100% today, even though I'm only feeling 70%, just because I want to stay committed to the things that I told myself I would do. Or, you know, you're feeling 60 or 70% and you're in a relationship and you've got this weekly date night that's been like, you know, really important for your relationship. Like you just go up, you just show up and you give it your 100%. And you can use that example with anything. And so when I tell people, like, sometimes in life you got to play hurt, I'm not talking about like you go and scrape your knee and you got to go still run. It's the emotional hurts. It's the mental hurts that I think sometimes people have a hard time moving through. And if you convince yourself that you have to wait until things are perfect to make a decision, or you're only going to do things when things go perfect, you'll never accomplish anything ever.
Right.
Because there is no perfection in life as it relates to like transformation, as it relates to life experience. I mean, sure, like there's like the perfect sunset, you know, I'm sure there's things like that. I'm talking about like real life. And you just you have to be able to get uncomfortable. You have to be able to get comfortable knowing that that's just the way that life is. so that you can convince yourself that, like, okay, like, I'm not feeling good today. I'm feeling stressed. Again, signal, like I talked about earlier. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to just kind of sit this one out, because like I look at my own story, especially the first few years. I mean, there was times I felt like crap. I mean, I wasn't talking to my mom hardly. I mean, I was damaged relationships with family. I owed my brothers a lot of money. Again, like I was on probation for 5 years, like a lot of stuff that was stressing me out. Couldn't get a job for a period of time because of my record. But if I had just told myself like, like I'm not feeling good, I'm just gonna wait until things get better. Like I might not be where I am today. I might be I might be in a grave. I might be in jail again. I might be whatever. I don't know, because that's where my life was going before I went to jail. And so I guess like to close the loop on that, like I think you have to be really prepared in life to face adversity and to ask yourself, like, when adversity comes, am I going to be the person that's like lukewarm with my goals and just saying that I'm only interested when things are good? Or am I going to prove to myself that no matter what, I'm going to bet on myself and I'm going to overcome the impossible and not give up on myself? It's like one of the greatest gifts I think I got from jail. I don't know who said this. I don't know if it was David Goggins. Somebody said something where they were like, essentially, it's like, it's easy to meditate and work out and do all the things when life is good. It's easy because you really, I mean, it's not really, there's no real reason that would limit you from doing those things, right? But when life gets tough, that's when you're tested. And I had the gift of developing a lot of these tools when I was like in the depths of, I mean, hell, you know, in my life, in the depths of despair, where I was in the middle of the fire, and I had to figure out how to stop getting burned, you know, like, and it was by working out, the way I talk to myself, practicing the pause, understanding that things will get better if I put in the work, leaning in on mentors, trusting myself, holding myself accountable, like all the things that we've kind of talked about. I happened to learn when I was going through one of the toughest moments of my life, and probably the toughest moment of my life. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a long way of saying, like, you got to be committed, you got to play hurt, and you got to show up for yourself, even when it doesn't make sense.
Love it. Love it. So, okay, what is your present why? Because I know, you spoke earlier about, when you were younger, your why was to impress the girls or get girls. What is your present why today? What keeps you going?
I mean, I want to change the way that people view adversity and mental health and how they deal with it. Like, I think a lot of times, like the idea of the show, The Adversity Advantage, wasn't necessarily like, okay, you got to go like do something crazy challenging to make your life better. It was more like a reflection of my story, where I saw how much adversity I had as a kid. And because I did things like acted out, abused drugs, sold drugs, was just careless in the way I lived my life got a lot worse. And I was able to rationalize it because of what I went through. And really, my life got worse because of how I behaved afterwards, not necessarily because of the divorce and the bullying and stuff. And then the ironic thing was, during like a time of massive adversity, my life really transformed. So, I want to provide tools through my the content I share and the people that I interview, for people to navigate different themes of adversity in their life, whether it's mental health, whether it's relationships, whether it's fitness, wellness, addiction, you name it, because it's not the divorce that destroys your life. It's typically what happens is, and again, just talking generally, I'm not talking about like abusive relationships or, narcissistic or toxic relationships. I'm talking generally speaking. What happens is people go and they'll drink like 2 bottles of wine every day for like 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And all of a sudden that compounds, and now it's impacting your work. It's impacting your relationship with your kids. It's impacting your health. It's impacting the way you talk to yourself. And then that becomes a pattern of behaviors that end up lasting for a long time if you're not careful. And then you look back and you're like, how'd this happen? And most people who are unaware are like, oh, it's because of the divorce. The divorce really rocked me. And it's like, no, what rocked you was you drinking 2 bottles of wine every single day for the next 5 years of your life. That's what rocked you.
Yeah.
So I want to help people create I want to help people reduce the amount of pain and suffering they have to go through when they're experiencing adversity, based on some of the stuff that we talk about on the show, and sharing stories, and even hearing parts of my story as well.
Wow. Thank you so much, Doug, for your transparency, for your gems, not everyone who's experienced adversity and hardship in life openly shares the lessons that they've learned and are as transparent about the things that they've been through. So I deeply, deeply appreciate you sharing that with the listeners and the world, and using that to make the impact that you are presently making. I would love if you could tell the listeners where they could stay connected with you to learn more from you and about you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you again for having me on. I love the conversation. I love getting deep on stuff like this. Best place to find me is I'm at Doug Bopst on all the social platforms. DougBopst.com is my website. If you want to listen to the pod, it's the Adversity Advantage podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever. And again, appreciate you having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. I will definitely have all the links to connect with you in the detailed section of the episode, so they don't have to search too far. And I just want to thank Colby Sharma for connecting us. That's Robin Sharma's son, for connecting us. I'm always grateful when, past guests highlight other amazing humans. So I want to thank him, and I want to thank you once again. I appreciate you and your time. And if there's anything that I could do to be of value to your community, I'd be more than happy to help.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And to all you healers out there, until next time, subscribe on all platforms, and don't forget to rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcast. And I just want to thank each and every one of you that continues to listen each week to help the show globally rank in the top 1.5% of most popular podcasts. That's out of over 3 million shows. So I truly, truly, truly appreciate you all. If you can think of, I'm going to challenge you to share this episode with 3 people that would receive value from hearing Doug's story. Feel free to screenshot this week's episode with your aha moments. You can tag Doug at Doug Bopst. That's DOUGBOPST. And you can tag myself at The Real McKinney Smith. A healthy community is a healing community, and a healing community is full of hope because it has seen its own people weather, survive, and thrive. So let's continue to heal her.